Coming up, once again, the final game preview is upon us as the New York Football Giants look to get that bad taste from week one out of their mouths against division rival in the Washington Commanders on the road. We break down injury updates, keys to getting that victory this week, and of course, our game predictions, fantasy lines, bets of the week from Andy, and a look back at Thursday Night Football that certainly reminds us of how perilous the QB position can be. We dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your hosts. Over here, Adam Armbrecht. Over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise. One of us is going to be coming in crisp and dynamic vocally. The other, because he's a hero, a journey of OGP and of the Giants fan base, is Andrew Makowitz. Going to be a little echoey, going to be out there on location somewhere in the wilderness, but making sure that he's here for our Friday preview of the New York Football Giants.
Yeah, listen, you may be crisp and clean audio, visual, but I will be crisp and clean on my picks, my predictions, and my insight and my analysis. So while it sounds like I might be shouting through a tunnel right now, at least when I tell you what the bet of the week is going to be, I'm going to be able to win the listeners some money, Adam.
You better believe it. We'll get into all of those aspects. It was a disastrous pick week for us in week one. I don't feel as bad because it seems like a lot of people missed on the NFL picks coming out of the gates there a week ago. So we'll go ahead and dive into that on the back end. But right out of the gate here, injury updates for the New York Football Giants. Dan Duggan reporting yesterday that linebacker Darius Muasau, his knee, cornerback Nick McLeod, who also had the knee and exited the game in week one, were both on the sidelines again, not looking good for them coming back. You also have Gunner, who went likely headed, to IR with the groin injury, the question marks around that. One clerical error. We were referencing Isaiah McKenzie. He also got designated with injured reserve and got cut from the team, so he's not going to be a viable option back in the door. When you hear those things, those are players that were contributing that got injured last week, but we also do get the positive, as we'll talk about Malik Neighbors here in a moment, that Micah McFadden looks like he's trending towards being available on Sunday after potentially, Brian Daboll had said, being on a snap count in week one. They didn't use him, and now hopefully he's ready to go because you open up another hole right back there after the 7th-round pick. Muasau looks like he could go down.
Yeah, Adam, which of the injuries that you're hearing about is most concerning to you?
Well, I'm going to say the Muasau one just because McFadden was injured and then you're worried about him being able to step in. And even though it's not Bobby Okereke, it's not Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, you do need that other player next to him. And we know Muasau made some plays. So I think there's something there, especially when we talk about trying to shut down the run game for the Washington Commanders, make them more one-dimensional. I need to know that I have a number 2 linebacker because we know the depth behind those players is even thinner than what you might initially think getting into primarily special teams contributors that then have to step up into that role.
Yeah, what I find interesting is obviously Isaiah McKenzie was cut IR. You have Gunnar Olszewski, who's not going to be available. The Giants went out and signed Amir Smith-Marset, who is a return specialist himself. Michael Gobriel, special teams coordinator, came out and said, and I quote, "This guy has real speed, like real speed." And that's exciting for the Giants because we talked about them not necessarily having a plan last year when things went awry. At least if Gunnar Olszewski isn't available, they have someone that has returned kicks before, scored touchdowns in his career. It feels like this was at least a deep breath of like, we're not going to have guys muffing punts in the back that have never done it before like we did last year.
Yeah, of course. And then the other positives when we talk about injury updates, Darius Slayton, he left in concussion protocol, but it looks like he's trending towards being available. When we talk about keys to getting some points up on the board here, we know how exposed the Washington Commanders were in week one against the Bucs. Happy to hear from a health standpoint that he's going to be back and available. And then we said Malik Neighbors. I mean, we're putting this towards the back end of the injury update, mostly because he played last week. He came out of it. Then you heard some comments in the locker room, moving a little gingerly, the knee. He was on the sidelines at times, but he looks like he's ready to get back. Talked about bouncing back off of a loss, not something you're familiar with for any of these high talented players coming out of premier schools in college, but at least he's going to be ready to go. My only, not concerned, but I'm just like, okay, then let's make sure that he is healthy, that he gets through week 2. Like, you want injury concerns to be minor and then a distant thought when it comes to your number 1 overall pick in the draft and making sure he's going to be healthy all 17.
Yeah. And Adam, I am excited about Malik Neighbors overall in the season. It feels like this is a really pivotal game for him just because we know the pressure that's going to be on Daniel Jones. We've talked about the number one wide receiver. Clearly, he is a guy that I am looking at in this game saying, as long as he is healthy, he is a guy that could be an instant impact for the Giants, and they desperately need it come Sunday.
Yeah, of course. And then also the possible return for Trey Hawkins as well. Now, listen, we understand what he's looked like in the preseason versus what he's looked like in the regular season. But if McLeod is going to go down and we start to talk about the snap counts and who's playing on the outside and Adoree Jackson, at some point you may just need to have a body out there. And he's certainly a bigger outside cornerback. So, hey, anybody, any option that you have is always better than not having the option. The other thing that we did want to touch on here before we turn over to keys to this game is obviously some very glaring ones when it comes to Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns coming out of week one. But Thursday Night Football, which we'll talk about in terms of opportunities for Daniel Jones to maybe rein himself in and have some short-term success here for the Giants. You look at Tua, you look at the way that he played, an absolute disastrous game for him, an absolute statement game from the Buffalo Bills, a team that doesn't have a number one wide receiver and has some holes on the defensive side of the football. But when he goes down there, trying to make a play at a point in the game when it feels like it's out of reach, same thing happened to Jordan Love in week 1, too. It's like sometimes these moments seem absolutely brutal when NFL teams shouldn't be, but are unwilling to throw in the towel on a game when it comes to key players. Especially when it comes to Tua, man. Absolutely brutal to see that injury because we know his history. He goes into concussion protocol again, and all of those same symptoms, all those same visuals that I think, unfortunately, like we're used to seeing from quarterbacks and from players on the field. The stiff ligaments, the hands, the fingers becoming restricted, the way the head and the neck area looks. So absolutely brutal. And again, one of those scary things when you think about what seemed like an innocuous play. And then he goes down a little bit awkwardly, and Hamlin comes in a little bit, at a soft angle, and it actually ends up making it that much worse than it could have been if you just go full bore and collide.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Adam, you said the game was kind of out of reach. The problem is the Dolphins have such an explosive offense. Down 3 scores in the third quarter, they're at the 10-yard line. If they go in, they're down 2 scores. They could
31-17. It's a ball game now. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. And instead, Tua trying to make a play. We've seen it too many times from him. It just shows that he's not, even if he comes back and plays, it feels like his future is in doubt. He can only be a shell of himself because you eliminate his ability to run almost at all. And it feels like you're bracing for this to happen at some point in his career again. And you hope that it's not going to be something that's very serious, like life-threatening. It makes me kind of go back to Daniel Jones and think, while Daniel Jones has had a neck injury and a knee injury, and he's been dinged up, at some point, like these injuries catch up with these quarterbacks, and it puts their future at risk. It's almost like if Daniel Jones were to tear his knee or have another serious neck injury, he'd probably be in the same boat as Tua. Like, what's the future look like for someone like that at the quarterback position?
Yeah, and it's crazy too because obviously they've both gotten big contracts. Daniel Jones would be the more questionable of the two, receiving the payout that he did. But you mentioned Tua. I mean, listen, this is more of a high level thing, and we'll talk about it as the season unfolds a little bit here because he's likely to miss some time, certainly in the short term. And then you're mentioning kind of bigger picture. But if you think about it, like if you are the Miami Dolphins, how are you looking at this? What are you going to think about in the short and long term? And I don't want to attach to what was a really scary moment for Tua and certainly for him from a health standpoint, this other thing, which is if you're Miami, you may start thinking about this season and some key players and some really big contracts differently because there may be coming a pivot point for that franchise if they don't believe that Tua is going to be able to come back and is going to be able to be healthy. And even, I mean, listen, that you can want to put him out there given how high the injury risk does seem for him. So obviously a really scary moment and a theme that we've seen. Again, mentioned Jordan Love, now Tua, you say Daniel Jones history. I mean, every quarterback has something that they carry forward with them. And I think in a lot of ways, man, that availability, it's as much about your talent. And by the way, Joe Burrow is another good example of this, dealing with his wrist early in the season. So you start to pile those up, and you mentioned it, how much that carries over going forward for these quarterbacks, maybe 2-3 years later, that you remember the injuries and how they're impacting their outlook beyond a given season or a given game. That being the case, we turn our attention over, obviously, to the Washington Commanders. We talked about the injury updates for Big Blue. Where are the areas that they can expose Washington on both sides of the football, and how critical is it for Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns to get after a rookie quarterback in Jayden Daniels. We'll dive into that coming up here in just one moment. All right, Andy, we talk about, obviously, week 2 division game. The Giants are 0-1. It's as ugly as it could have looked against the Minnesota Vikings. But if you win in week 2, suddenly you can at least say we're still in the mix. We still have something to root for here. Remind everybody real quick before we talk about our keys, where's the betting line here? Has there been any movement throughout this week as we come into it?
Yeah, so the betting line has been at 1.5 for most of the week. The Giants are getting 1.5 with the over-under at 44. It's bounced around between 43 and 44. You may see it differently at some different books. I've even seen the betting line start moving slightly towards the Giants' way, which is interesting because Covers.com does a good job giving you the breakdown and analysis. 73% of all wagers are going in on the Washington Commanders right now, yet the line is moving down on the Giants. So while the betting public is saying the Giants stink, you absolutely need to bet the Commanders, the people that have the large amounts of money are saying the Giants can't look that bad. Rookie quarterback in his home debut, give me the New York Giants. So I find that fascinating. What are your thoughts early on, knowing that it's a point and a half, kind of close to a pick'em game? Are you surprised it's not 3 or 4 for the Giants right now?
Nah, I mean, listen, if it was any other team, maybe it would be different, right? If it wasn't the Commanders coming off the game against the Bucks, where, hey, guess what? We got the 2 teams that arguably looked among the bottom 4 in terms of coming out of that first game. Difference being, obviously, for the Commanders, you're talking about a rookie quarterback and trying to find your rhythm with those things, whereas the Giants are staring down a very different spectrum. So, I mean, no, and again, neutral site, obviously, you would think that maybe that's going to trend it back a little bit because you're at home for the Commanders. Maybe the number should be larger. I just think it's more of an indictment of these 2 teams in the NFC East rather than anything else. And we know when you come into this game, you're talking about the Commanders who gave up the most passing yards in the NFL in 2023. The Commanders were also dead last in the NFL in neutral pass rate in week 1 as well. So, like, there's reasons, ironically, that you should be excited about the New York Giants offense and their ability maybe to attack this secondary. Do you feel like, to me, coming out of the week 1, it's only 44 yards? You used Wan'Dale Robinson taking the over a week ago. I think you come right back to him again. We mentioned Malik Neighbors and some of those concerns, but Wan'Dale Robinson coming out of the slot, there's a theme from that Miami game that I wanted to use. If, regardless of health and the injury, if Tua had played a decent game instead of throwing 9,000 interceptions, they talked about how when you have these elite weapons in Tyreek Hill and Waddle, you want to get it to him. But it's okay to look downfield and then settle back to the easy option, drop it off to the running backs out of the backfield. And I wonder if Daniel Jones, if Brian Dable, you come out of a bad game, you want the bounce back. Jones has had success, but maybe you say, let's run those deep routes and let's try to get some of the easy ones. Like, let's just get the ball out of your hands. Let's treat you like Sam Darnold and the Vikings did in week 1. Find passes, release passes, and we'll take the easy chunk plays early in this game.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, Wan'Dale Robinson's receiving yards was 29.5 last week. It's 37.5 this week. It's gone up.
So they reacted to it
50%. So, like, they're clearly saying Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be a focal point. I actually think, and this is like kind of the iteration of how crazy I get with this. It's like, okay, Wan'Dale Robinson showed to be the focal point and the security blanket for Daniel Jones. So if the Commanders are like, we're going to take away Wan'Dale Robinson because Daniel Jones does not have the ability to stretch the field and throw the ball vertically, they may prefer to say, let's see if Daniel Jones can sit in the pocket with our pass rush and be able to take deep shots. And so, like, if that's what the defense ends up giving the Giants, then the question is, can Daniel Jones make those throws to Malik Neighbors down the field, to Jalen Hyatt, to Theo Johnson down the seam? So for me, I'm almost thinking of it like, this feels like a game where they're going to put an emphasis on stopping Wan'Dale Robinson in the run, and they may say, take your best shot deep, Daniel Jones.
A very easy part to make on that as well, because you mentioned like stopping the run and forcing Daniel Jones to be a little more willing to take some risks down the field, is the running game. We go back that week ago, he throws bad interceptions, pick sixes, you're down early. The disparity between pass and run plays is just not what you want. And also the success on those run plays is not what you want. So the Giants, I think too, it's like, it is that thing when you go back and you look at this game and you remember that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield, 24-30, 289, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, sacked just one time in this game. There's some other stats I want to get to here, but the 83.2 QBR and the 146 rating, we talked about having 5 plays, including a 19-yarder, but 5 plays essentially of 20 yards or more. So they took massive chunk plays. 130 passing yards came on 5 individual plays a week ago. So you want to get eager, you want to get greedy. And the only thing that stops you from doing that, and I think the Giants are going to go that way, the only thing that stops you is that Daniel Jones looks so bad in week 1, it makes you feel like you cannot take that risk necessarily. Interestingly enough, though, Andy, if we flip it over the other way, we talk about the trenches here. It's hard to look at some of the grades coming out of week 1 for the Giants offensive line and put too much on the run game. I just want to see more opportunity and more consistency there before I judge it wholly. The pass protection was good. When you flip it the other way, here's the only thing. If I'm going to open up, like, it's not a concern, but just a reality, because I mentioned Baker Mayfield was only sacked 1 time in that game. However, if you go inside the defense for the Washington Commanders, and I'm not telling you that you need to be scared of the Commanders defense, but they did have 8 total tackles for a loss. They did have 2 bad passes batted down, and they also had 4 QB hits. Like, it's not as if they weren't there at all, right? It's the reality that they weren't able to get home on some of those. And hey, unfortunately, right now, if I'm comparing Daniel Jones to Baker Mayfield, I'm not talking about like for like. I'm not talking about guys that have similar recent success. So there is something there. And even though we love Malik Neighbors, knee injury or otherwise, that is not Mike Evans. And I cannot look on the Giants roster right now and say I definitely have a Godwin on this team that has had his track record as well. So there are differences here. The Giants need to be quick read, quick reaction, get the ball out, and find ways to have success. It isn't just set it and forget it that you'll torch the Washington Commanders defense, despite Daniel Jones' success in recent history.
I mean, when you talk about keys to success, I look at last week as informing me of potential trends of things we either want to see more of or to avoid. The Giants gave up 5 sacks, and they only had 1 sack against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, game script obviously plays a huge part in how many pass rushes there are and what's going on. But, Adam, the offensive line and Daniel Jones holding the ball cannot give up 5 sacks and expect to win. They cannot give up a defensive touchdown to the opponent. Those types of things are easy mistakes that the Giants could potentially clean up a little bit to make themselves look better, especially on offense. So to me, I look at that straight away and I'm like, 5 sacks. We just literally cannot have that. It's like, I feel like it's Groundhog Day where we're back into last year and there's multiple sacks across the board. The offensive line, I think we all agree, looked pretty good. It's on Daniel Jones and being able to keep the game script close so that you're not as one-dimensional so other teams can tee off on you. So for me, I'm looking at how the offensive line plays, but I'm also looking at how composed Daniel Jones is going to be in the pocket, because we can't just have him dropping back and being afraid of getting sacked, throwing it early, as you mentioned, and making mistakes.
Yeah, and you go back and you look at that game, and obviously the Bucs, they're up in this game. It's a big margin, but they had 30 pass plays, they had 30 rushing plays. Bucky Irving went 9 for 62. Rachaad White was the little chunks, 15 for 31. Baker Mayfield even scrambled for a handful of yards. They had 112 rushing yards against the Washington Commanders. So it's where you don't want to get totally out of character and abandon something that was very unsuccessful in week 1, and you got behind and you weren't able to do it. Likewise, though, in spite of this being a game, like, I think it's really easy to sit here and go, 37-20, Washington Commanders. Well, okay, it was a controlled game for the rookie in his debut, and Jayden Daniels didn't turn the ball over with any interceptions in that regard. By the way, he carried the ball 16 times. He scrambled for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns. Brian Robinson went 12 for 40. They had 138 rushing yards in this game. So if you think it's as simple as just saying, oh, they're bad, our defense will eat them up, maybe that's the case. But again, I don't put the Giants on the level of the Buccaneers. So 30 plus points for the New York Football Giants, like, get out of here. So you have to find a way to be successful on the defensive side if we flip the script here a little bit. And that obviously comes down to dictating tempo here. Listen, Shane Bowen talked about it. You need our best players to play their best every single week. Kayvon Thibodeau and Brian Burns. Brian Burns, you take the little flash and you say, oh, I can see it. He's an impact hitter. He really hits. Oh, great. You got to get home. You got to get home and rattle Jayden Daniels. You got to make life easier for the secondary of this team. And if you are that front, Dexter Lawrence played out of his mind in week 1. It didn't matter. It did not move the needle. The thing that I like about this potential matchup is you look back and you see 28-6 and you go, my God, what a disaster. pick six. Okay. 21-6, right? Short field where the Giants don't put points on the board. This is a classic tale as old as time for Giants fans where the defense had to be on the field too much and you weren't able to protect yourself a little bit for a unit that has some holes on it.
Adam, you mentioned having a short field and not being able to capitalize on it. It is important to note that the Giants were 0-3 in the red zone against the Vikings. And what's crazy is that historically, Daniel Jones is actually a pretty good red zone player because he has the ability to use
leading up to the season. They were like, come on, he's so good inside the 20. Like, well.
So the question is, does the trend continue where they're getting short fields and not being able to capitalize, or does it go back to this offense being extremely efficient in the red zone, which they absolutely were in 2022. And when Daniel Jones has been healthy, they have had success. So for me, I'm looking at not only the Burns and Thibodeau thing. I think you're absolutely right. We can't have one sack against Jayden Daniels. That is not the recipe for success. But the Giants offense needs to capitalize, and they need to find a way to get in the end zone. If the Giants don't score a touch, what are we talking about if the Giants don't score a touchdown against the Commanders, right? Like that to me is the thing that screams out to me. They have to be successful when they get inside the 20.
No, that's the bottom line here. And I think, it's that we know these things, disastrous week one. And what does it have to look like? When we talk about resetting the table, I can tell you a story where the Giants, we're going to get into our game predictions here in a second, where the Giants don't have to win this game in terms of how you feel about performances and individual gameplay. It does tell you something about the season overall, but there has to be a way for the New York Football Giants to get themselves on the scoreboard against the Washington Commanders. Coming up here in a second, let's talk about game predictions, let's talk about fantasy plays, and let's talk about Andy's bet of the week. We'll get into that in just one moment. All right, finally, Andy, we're going to talk about fantasy plays, bets of the week, and our picks for over the weekend. But game prediction-wise, give us that. We know it's -1.5, but where is the over-under set at, and who are you taking in this game? Obviously, Andy is full of confidence. He's going to take Daniel Jones and the Giants.
It's like you know me so well from doing the podcasting. You know what? It is such an overreaction with how poor the Giants played. It's sometimes you kind of look at it and say, maybe the Giants aren't the best team, but week one doesn't feel like anything went the Giants' way. You had the interceptions that Daniel Jones threw. You had the fluke pick six kind of thing that happened where Daniel Jones just completely did not see the defensive end. 0-3 in the red zone, 2 interceptions. You lost the turnover battle. You lost the rushing yards per play, receiving yards per play. You lost every single battle in that game. This, to me, is Daniel Jones and the New York Giants' last stand. If Daniel Jones wants the opportunity to be the Giants quarterback for the rest of the year, he has to play better. There's just no question about it. If he doesn't, I have a sneaking suspicion that he gets pulled at halftime. I think Daniel Jones has had his best success against the Washington Commanders. As I mentioned before, Ryan Dunleavy said, if Daniel Jones could pick any team with his career on the line, which team would he want to face? It would be the Washington Commanders because he's had the most success against them in his career. I think the Giants play like there is no tomorrow on Sunday. I believe that Daniel Jones has a bounce-back game. I will look like a complete fool if it does not happen the way that I think it is. But I think the Giants' offense will move the ball. I think Daniel Jones, out of necessity, is going to have to take shots downfield because if he doesn't, he will be benched. And so for me, I think the Giants' offense gets going. I could see Malik Neighbors having a big day. I could see this Giants' offense exploding. You said earlier in the show, 30 points, get out of here. I'm pretty close on that one. I think the defense plays well. I think the Giants' offense finally gets going. I've got the New York Giants winning 28-20 in a game that goes over, and the Giants offense looks way better than it did against the Vikings.
42.5 is the over-under right now. So Andy taking the over on that as well. Listen, I think it will look better. I think it will be stronger. I'm curious to see. You mentioned Daniel Jones' career being on the line. So Brian Dable is going to want that to happen, right? And I think sometimes the classic questions in post games are, well, what was the play design versus what got executed, right? Was Daniel Jones supposed to be trying to make those plays, but he chose not to? I want to see him push the ball downfield. I want to see him take those shots. But if you're doing the both, Andrew, you have to realize that the Giants do need to win this game if they're talking about the season overall. So, yes, they need to take shots downfield, but Devin Singletary has to get going, right? Like the run game has to be something you show balance here. So, listen, why not? I'm going to take the Giants to win this game because what's the difference? What other choice do we have here? But I can't go full bore, so I'll take the Giants to win it. I'm going to take them listen, I'm going to go nail biter again here because I don't know what the defense is going to be capable of. I'm going to go 24-20. I'm still going to take the over in this game. That's still a very big number for this offense to put up. And it's egg on our face when you come back in and the Giants score 9 points and it looks like a mess. But if you're going to have success, this Washington Commanders team still is susceptible. One note that I'll just make here in terms of the secondary, I have to go off screen here for some of these stats. Deontay Banks was targeted 4 times, gave up 3 passes, 18.7 yards, 156.2 QB rating. Flott just 2 targets, gave them both up, a 158.3. Adoree Jackson only targeted twice, 85.4, 4.5 yards per catch. And then Drew Phillips, 7 yards per catch on just 2 of them, a 95.8 QB rating. All this tells you is Sam Darnold and the Vikings didn't have to go nuts against the secondary. The most was Deontay Banks getting targeted 4 times. Everybody else was two catches. So that's my other concern here. It's rookie quarterback. This is where we come right back to Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Bobby Okereke. Do your jobs. You need to rattle a rookie quarterback. And if you cannot do that in this week, if you cannot find a way to lead this team and then demand Daniel Jones hold up his end of the bargain, we're going to be having a very different conversation as we look ahead to week 3. So taking the Giants, give them to me 24-20. We move on quickly here, Andy. Not quickly, but you know what I mean. Let's give people what they need. What's your quick fantasy play before we go into your bet of the week?
Yeah, I think Tyrone Tracy is a sneaky fantasy play. I've mentioned it a few times earlier in the week. Obviously, out of the backfield, the Buccaneers exploited the Washington Commanders by giving the ball to Bucky Irving and Rashad White. They look tremendous. I think there was 13 catches between the 2 running backs out of the backfield. That is the role that Tyrone Tracy plays on this team. A lot of the books don't have something up for Tyrone Tracy because they're probably afraid of the exposure. But if you want a fantasy play, I could see him being a weapon in the red zone that the Giants could utilize. Just keep an eye out on Tyrone Tracy, especially in daily fantasy sports, because he's going to be so cheap for you to be able to plug and play.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and take Devin Singletary. Give me the over on his yardage. Maybe take him for an anytime touchdown. I just think the Giants, listen, move the ball. It's all great. When you get down the red zone, this is kind of the reason you brought him in this offseason, for some consistency in that area. Let's look around the NFL, Andy. What's your favorite play and what is your underdog this week?
My favorite play of the week, I went back and forth on this. I think it's the Colts -2.5 going to Lambeau Field, playing against the Jordan Love-less Green Bay Packers. I think Malik Willis just got there like a week ago. I feel like they're only going to have a small package for him. Give me Anthony Richardson. It looks like the Colts offense is going to be explosive. I just think it's going to take a while for the Packers to figure it out. Give me the Colts -2.5.
Give me the 49ers -5.5 against the Vikings. The team that looked really good against the Giants, guess what? They weren't playing the San Francisco 49ers. We saw what they did in week 1. They are clearly the best or one of the best top 1 or 2 teams in the entire NFL. So I think Minnesota just gets a dose of reality. Sam Darnold, you're not going to look like you did against the New York Giants. So I'll take them -5.5 as my favorite. For my underdog play, I'm scrolling through here a little bit. Gosh, you'd like to take a look at the Raiders against the Ravens. Nice try. That might actually have been my favorite play of this week, potentially. Instead, why don't you go ahead and give me, you know what? Let's have some fun with our stadium brethren. +3.5 for the Tennessee Titans at home, hosting the visiting New York Jets, because, hey, I don't know what the New York Jets are capable of. And frankly, I think Tennessee is a little bit better than people think. That's my underdog play for this week.
It's a sneaky one. The Jets have to get it right, too. Imagine they lose to the Titans. I've got a cheeky one. Rams +1 on the road. It's almost like a pick 'em against the Cardinals. The Cardinals look great against the Bills, who just demolished the Dolphins.
Yeah.
But Matt Stafford, anytime you put him out there, he is a top 5 to 7 quarterback in this league. It just feels like even without Puka Nacua, they are dinged up across the offensive line. I give the ball to Stafford and let him cook, and let's see what happens. Give me the Rams +1.
For all of Andy's, for his bet of the week, he already gave you Tyrone Tracy Jr., but he's also going to give you one that's centered around the Commanders that still has a giant slant to it. Head over to onegiantpodcast.com. We'll have all those up going into the weekend. And obviously, you get us over on YouTube. You get us over on the podcast feed. May even do like we did a week ago. I popped in Sunday morning. Wanted to go ahead and just give a little chop up before we head in. Last look at injury notes and some plays that we maybe like, as well as just a spin around the NFL as a whole. Be sure to do all those things. Check out our sponsors. It's all in the show notes. We both have the New York Football Giants winning. Of course. Why wouldn't we? We're psychopaths. But until next time, Andrew, until the best times, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.